thought you'd have had a better life with us, rather than with them. I went quiet after that, and we hugged. But it still bothered me. Was I not good enough for my real parents or something? What was the real reason? Meanwhile, years and years passed, and no one decided to adopt me. Many couples came to the orphanage, but it always seemed pure coincidence that they didn't want me. When I was a baby, couples came, but they were only looking for a son. As I grew into a toddler, couples came, who were only looking for a baby. As I reached my teen years, I got to the point where I was too old to be adopted. It seemed I had missed every opportunity of having a family. I was devastated, but things weren't all bad. Opposite to the orphanage lived a sweet and kind lady, and we called her Aunt Connie. She lived on her own, but there were plenty of times when she visited our orphanage and brought us gifts. She was so generous, and I absolutely adored her. I thought she was the prettiest person I had ever seen, and whenever she came, I would always fight to be closest to her. Sometimes she would take us on mini excursions. Of course, Mrs. Harris was 15 years old at the time, and she had taken us to the park where an art festival was taking place. We strolled through the park, and there were many artists displaying their paintings. I trailed a little further from the group, and suddenly I met this old man, sitting to the side of the festival on a stool. He had a canvas in front of him and seemed to be wondering what to paint. I noticed he had on a beanie and sunglasses, and I remember thinking he almost looked like he was hiding his identity. I walked over and said hello. Well, as soon as the old man saw my face, he seemed to have an aha moment. "Please, young woman, may I paint your portrait?" he asked. I shrugged. I had nothing else to do, and it would be interesting to see how the final painting turned out. So I agreed, and next minute he was sitting on another stool opposite to him and told me to stay very still. He asked me to look off to the right with my head slightly tilted. After a while, Aunt Connie found me. "Where have you been?" she asked, slightly panicked. "We've been looking for you everywhere. This man is painting a portrait of me," I said. As I spoke, I went to look at Aunt Connie, but suddenly the artist raised his hand and pointed to the right again, and I hurried to return to the same pose as last time. Aunt Connie let me stay there, and for the next few hours, this strange artist painted my portrait. Finally, after what seemed forever, he put down his paintbrush and told me it was done. My body ached from staying still for so long. I looked at the painting and gasped. It was really good, like really good. He really seemed to have captured my essence. The artist thanked me for my time, and I rejoined the others, and we went home. To be honest, I didn't really think of it much afterwards, but that portrait changed my life forever. As it turned out, that old man was one of the most famous artists in the world. He had gone on to sell my portrait painting for millions of dollars. My face became something of an icon, almost to the standard of Mona Lisa. You've heard of them talking about her unique smirk. Well, people always talked about my wise eyes, despite being only 15 years old at the time. The famous artist I learned later on, his name, D'Angralio, named the painting Wise Child. My face became one of the most famous faces in the world. At first, I had no idea. I didn't even know it was a famous artist who had painted me. But one day, it came on the news. Mrs. Harrison immediately cried out to everyone to hurry to the living room, and soon we were all crammed in front of the TV, shocked to see my face was all over the screen. It talked about how the painting had sold for so much, and how everyone was searching for the wise child, as they called me. It gave a phone number for anyone who had any information, and we instantly called the number. I was so honored to have been painted by the famous artist D'Angralio. Mrs. Harrison ended up talking to an agent, and I immediately got booked onto a talk show to tell my life story. I was so shocked by how fast things had happened, and before I knew it, I was getting ready to go on live TV on a talk show. I was so nervous. The interviewer asked me a ton of questions about my life, and when they found out I was an orphan, well, everybody went mad. There was a huge search to see if they could find my parents. Honestly, I wasn't that bothered. Sure, it would be nice to meet them, but they weren't my real parents. They had abandoned me. The people I considered to be the closest thing to my parents were Mrs. Harrison and Aunt Connie. They were the ones who had loved me and cared for me growing up. But then, Mrs. Harrison told me something that completely shocked me. One day she came into my bedroom and told me she had something important to say. "Your parents have come forward," she told me. I couldn't believe it. Mrs. Harrison told me a couple had come forward and confessed I was